Hello, and thank you for joining us for today's virtual education program at Cancer Support Community South Bay. I'm Rebecca, the program manager, and I welcome you to this workshop titled Strategies in Optimizing Wellness and Resilience. Before we begin, if this is your first time joining us, CSC South Bay's mission is to uplift and strengthen people impacted by cancer by providing support, fostering compassionate communities, and breaking down barriers to care. Our vision is that everyone impacted by cancer receives the support they want and need throughout their experience. We serve the South Bay, Long Beach, and Orange County area all at no cost. Our program includes support groups, networking groups, healthy lifestyle classes, social activities, and educational programs like this workshop. Educational programs are open to all. If you'd like to hear more about our services or join our community, please visit our website at cscsouthbay.org. Before I introduce today's speaker, we ask you to keep your microphone muted to eliminate any distracting background noise. However, please feel free to enter any questions into the chat function found at the bottom of the Zoom window at any time. Without further ado, I'll introduce our workshop speaker. Dr. Arash Asher has served as the Director of Cancer Survivorship and Rehabilitation at Cedars-Sinai Cancer since 2008. He has a special interest in the physical and rehabilitative needs of cancer survivors who continue to experience the effects of their cancer or its treatment. Dr. Asher has led the development of several unique cancer survivorship programs with his colleagues, including Emerging from the Haze, Grace, and others with the goal of optimizing physical, psychological, and spiritual resilience for patients with cancer. Dr. Asher completed a physical medicine and rehabilitation residency at UCLA and a cancer rehabilitation fellowship at MD Anderson Cancer Center in Houston, Texas. Thank you so much, Dr. Asher, for being here with us today.
Okay, thank you, Rebecca, and thank you everyone for coming. I think we have a small enough group that I'd like to make this to the degree possible as interactive as possible, and as communal as possible. So I'm going to ask some questions of you as we go. Please feel free to use your hand feature to ask me a question or write things in the chat. I'm more interested in kind of having a conversation and engaging with the group than just going over a predetermined number of slides. The slides are less important to me than the conversation because, as we'll talk about, um, this is a very personal matter. I started, when I started as a cancer rehabilitation physician, when I had a full head of hair, it was easier in a way when you're younger and starting out to focus on the physical aspects of going through cancer treatment, cancer fatigue and chemo brain and neuropathy issues and lymphedema and various pain syndromes. What became clear that was on what was necessary, but at the same time very difficult, is figuring out how we're going to manage existential suffering. And I'm now old enough to say, without, being negative or dark, that everyone suffers at some point. If you're that unicorn that's never suffered in your life, I want to meet you. Everyone suffers. And the palliative care literature has kind of defined suffering in any one of these arenas. Like, we're preoccupied with the past or the future. It's hard to be in the present. We feel disconnected with others. We want to be in control, but it may feel very difficult to do so. And we'll come back and talk about this existential vacuum. Like, it's hard to figure out what is the meaning of all this when we are truly suffering. And the question is, well, how do we deal with this? And when I first started to think about and grapple with this issue, kind of like at night or on the weekends when you have time to think a little bit more clearly and deeply, I started to think about the most important questions in my mind. And you could argue against me, and I would love that. I would love for you to say, no, this is not getting to the heart of it. But if we think about what it really means to be human, I think every thoughtful human thinks about these questions at some point. Number one, what does it mean to be healthy? We'll talk about what that means. What does it mean to be resilient? And perhaps most importantly, what does it mean to truly be fulfilled? Now, when I started to think about this, I remember coming across the root word the root definition of the word medicine, which is derived from the Latin medicina, which means to heal or to restore health. And again, I was hoping to make this a little more interactive. So I want to ask you, whether you want to just unmute, you feel free, or if you want to write in the chat, when you hear the word medicine today, what do most Americans think of? But just reflexively, I wouldn't even think about it too much. When you hear the word medicine, what do most Americans think of today? Let me just see. I guess some people are going in the chat. Okay, so one person wrote sickness. Anyone else?
Illness.
Medications, illness. Okay, good. Anybody have anything? Medications again. Okay. So I think that's right. Like, most of us, when we hear the word medicine, and I wrote down my answer, we think of a procedure, a blood test, a surgery, a CAT scan, an MRI, a prescription drug, et cetera, et cetera. Kind of like what you said. Um, Kind of different from the root word of the original word medicine. And what's the problem in my mind with medicine equaling the CAT scans and MRIs? And I'm going to argue that the problem with this association in our mind is that when we view medicine through that lens, we're always reacting, right? If our CAT scan shows, no evidence of disease and clearance, we feel good. If it shows progression, we feel another way. If the blood test shows our tumor markers are going up, we feel one way. If it shows that it's going down, we feel another way. So we're reactionary, right? We're treating everything like a disease. And when we come back to these basic questions again, what does it mean to be healthy or resilient or fulfilled? And again, I challenge you to kind of question me on this. I'm going to argue that there is no pill, there is no surgery, there is no magic supplement that's going to answer these questions for us. Now, again, I prescribe antidepressants and I do feel like they have a role, and I prescribe pain medications and I prescribe anti-anxiety medicines, and I think all of these things have a role in the right situation, but antidepressants in and of themselves do not make us feel healthy, resilient, and fulfilled. Then the question is, what do we do? And I'm going to kind of pull from a larger program we run at Cedars-Sinai, which is called our Grace Program. But one of the basic arguments I'm going to make is that holistic healing, true healing in the original root of the word, is really found by the types of thoughts we think about on a consistent basis, the kinds of behaviors and actions we take on a daily basis, and the way we take care of ourselves and each other. I am not saying this is easy, but I'm just here to make an argument that when we think about how one grapples with suffering as we defined it earlier, a pill alone is not going to solve that tremendous challenge that most of us, all of us, will face at some point. So we only have a few minutes together. Like in my mind, what are some of the key ingredients for that kind of resiliency and fulfillment? And I would just want to share and highlight a few of these components that I know you all already know, but maybe it's just worth thinking about and hearing about in a different way. And again, if there are questions, concerns, whatever, feel free to raise your hand or write some in the chat. We'll try to take things as we go, as best as I can. So number one, this idea of meaning and purpose. And I want to start this story really with an anecdote. And believe me, I know this is just an anecdotal story, but I think it's a useful way to start the conversation. And this anecdotal story actually tells the account of a gentleman known by the name of Mr. Israel Crystal. His picture is up before you. And he got a fair amount of attention back in 2016 because he won the Guinness Book of World Record, because at the time he was the oldest male alive in the world at 112. He actually passed away 1 year later at 113. Now, one of the reasons he got so much attention at this time was obviously 112 is an incredible age for anyone, but he got a fair amount of attention because he also was a Holocaust survivor, which means He lost everyone in his family, perished. He lost all of his belongings. He was subjected to incredibly hard living and working conditions. He whittled down to 87 pounds, so he was on the brink of starvation, but somehow he still made it to 112. And of course, when he was going through these interviews, everyone asked him this question, like, how in the world did you experience this much loss, this much suffering, and still make it? And there was one passage from one interview that kind of stood out to me, and I want to read this to you. This is what he said. I don't know the secret for long life. I believe that everything is determined from above, and we shall never know the reasons why. There have been smarter, stronger, and better looking men than me who are no longer alive. All that is left for us to do is to keep on working as hard as we can and rebuild what is lost. Now, I'll be the first to admit I have no idea how he made it to this incredible age, and I'm sure luck or maybe aspects of, his genetic lottery may have played a role. But if I had to guess, or if I had to guess one of his secrets, I think it's contained within this passage. And let me know if you see it too. But if I had to guess, it's this idea here, right? That he was telling us what his purpose was. He had a clear mission. His mission was what? To keep on working and to rebuild what is lost. Now, it doesn't mean everyone has the same mission, but it seems like he had a clear sense of clarity on what was most important to him after all that he endured, and he pursued that pathway. And this is just an anecdote, but this idea was really captured and written about in probably one of the most important works of the 20th century in terms of psychology by Dr. Viktor Frankl. He was a psychiatrist. He also was actually a Holocaust survivor. And he also suffered greatly, right? He was in Auschwitz and 4 different concentration camps, and his mother and father and brother and pregnant wife were all killed and perished. And he lost all of his belongings and all the rest. And I'm not here to recount that. But what Frankl did as a psychiatrist is he anecdotally kind of observed, let's just say 1 in 10 people in Auschwitz survived. And he was the first to admit that luck played a role in it, right? You went to this line or that line or who you knew or whatever it may be. But he argued it was more than just luck. What he observed is that that 1 in 10 may have had luck, but they also had a will, a purpose, a meaning, something that was beyond just them, that gave them some kind of endurance to live through the hell that they were living through, right? And he called this type of therapy and helping people find that sense of meaning and purpose logotherapy. And the essence of logotherapy was that we can find meaning and purpose in a significant way in one of 3 areas. Number one, through our work. And this doesn't have to be just financially, kind of rewarded work, but volunteering or acts of service, but doing something significant. 2, acts of love, like caring for another person. Or number 3, particularly when we're in a really difficult time, cultivating and acting with courage. Again, particularly when we're in a time of distress. So courage or love or work. He would argue any one of these 3 things or a combination of these things can be really important in cultivating a life of meaning and purpose. Now, one of the other things Frankl talked about, and I talk about in some of our other programs, is something brought to us by Nietzsche. Now, I think you all know who Nietzsche is, right? A famous philosopher. He has this famous quote that says, "He who has a why to live for can bear almost anyhow." So what does this have to do with what we're talking about now? To me, it has everything to do with what we're talking about now, because as I see things, we spend a lot of time, and I'm no different, right? This includes me. When I'm going through a challenge, let's say, a lot of my time is spent on, well, how am I going to get through this, right? How are we going to solve this problem? How am I going to get through this challenge? And Nietzsche's point, and Frankl approved of these ideas greatly, was we need to spend more time thinking about the why, right? If we have a strong enough why, we'll figure out how. And again, that was Frankl's observation in the camps. If that person in the camps had a why on how they had to survive, whether it was to go back to their teaching or their art or their science or to write a book so that this wouldn't happen again, or whatever it may be, if we spend some more time thinking about the why, the kind of the how would follow. Now remember, Frankl wrote this incredible book, Man's Search for Meaning, in 9 days after World War II. I think it came out in 1947. So he was not alive, actually passed away in his 90s, sometime before the year 2000. So he lived a long time, but he was not alive in 2016 when this study came out. And this was, I thought, a really, really interesting study. They looked at about 135,000 adults. And what they did is in the study, they knew among these 130,000 information about these people as it relates to factors that were already known to relate to longevity. So, for example, they knew who smoked and who didn't smoke, who exercised, who didn't exercise, who was obese, who wasn't obese, who had high blood pressure, who didn't. So all the things that we already knew were highly correlated with longevity. They had that data. And in a statistically valid way, they factored all of these variables, asking a basic question. And that question was, when you factor in all these things like smoking and no smoking, etc., if you compared those adults who had the most sense of meaning and purpose in their lives compared to those who had the least, did that make an impact in longevity? And in fact, you'll see what Frankl argued about many, many, many years prior, right? Those that had the most sense of purpose in life, when you factored everything else in, all-cause mortality was reduced by about 17%. Cardiovascular events, which means heart attacks and strokes, also reduced by 17%. Now, I want to emphasize, lest you're thinking that I'm being a Pollyanna about things, it wasn't like the study was showing, you just have a purpose in life and your cause of mortality is down to zero, right? You just live forever. No, I mean, 17% is 17%. I think it's a pretty meaningful, right, number, but it doesn't mean, right, it's going to solve all of life's problems. It just, number one, it may give us an edge, and the same edge that Frankl saw in the concentration camps 75 years prior. Now, the second point I want to make is I do believe cultivating a sense of meaning and purpose leads to, or at least increases the chance of the next thing I'd like to talk about, which is this enigmatic but all important idea of experiencing a sense of fulfillment. And I think the sense of awe that goes with it may go with this idea. So how do we achieve a sense of fulfillment? And again, one of the ideas I think we already talked about, but there's another idea that I think is equally important, brought up originally by Dr. Frankl. And one of the things Frankl talked about in his work, Man's Search for Meaning, is he beckoned his readers and his followers to stop asking the question, what do I expect from life? And to instead ask the question, what does life expect from me? Now I realize there's just a small, subtle transposition of words, right? They seem like they're the same, but the implications of meaning of living a life through one set of lenses versus the other could not be more profound. Think about it. Do a thought experiment for yourself and just think about it. What do I expect from life? Think about what it means to live a life with that lens, or what does life expect from me? And Frankl used the word life, but some may choose to substitute the word for creator or God or the universe or however you want to interpret that. But what does life expect from me? And as you think about that question and the dichotomy of living this life versus the other, I want to talk about a study for a moment. Hopefully, I'm not getting too philosophical for you and come back to this question, okay? So the question that this or the research study I want to kind of allude to that I think will inform this Frankl um, framework is the following. This study recruited is actually done at UCLA, very close nearby to us at Cedars. They recruited people who reported to be happy, right? So they filled out questionnaires, and all these people reported high levels of well-being. But they recruited people who were either very strongly hedonistic versus eudaimonic. Now, I think a hedonist, you all know, is it's basically someone who is like a pleasure seeker, right? So if I'm at a dinner party, let's say, and if I knew the person sitting to my left was a hedonistic personality, I might assume that they're there because, there was filet mignon being served and nice wine and champagne, and they're playing nice music and people are dressed up, and they were drawn to these kind of aspects of the dinner party, and they enjoyed those kind of tangible, finer things in life. Now, if on the other hand, I told you the person sitting on my other side was a eudaimonic type person, I imagine most of us are not familiar with that. What does that mean? And eudaimonia is a term originally claimed from Aristotle, and it's meant to imply more virtuous living. So it means, for example, if that other person sitting to my right is eudaimonic, I might assume they wanted to have a meaningful conversation with an old friend, or it was a fundraiser for an important cause, or there was something important to them in terms of their sense of mission that drew them to this dinner. They're more about service, for example. Okay, so those are the basic definitions. So the study recruited people who were hedonistic or eudaimonic. Everyone reported high levels of well-being, but then they decided this is where things got interesting. I'll walk you through this. They wanted to look at their inner biology, right? So on the surface, they report high levels of well-being, but what did their inner biochemistry look like? And this is the part I thought things got really interesting. So one of the things they looked at is something called CTRA gene expression. That's just a fancy word for a set of genes that's turned on when we're experiencing adversity or the stress response, the fight or flight response, right? Something that we don't want on over the long run because it's associated with more chronic health issues. And what you'll notice is the hedonistic group upregulated. That means they had turned on more of the CTRA gene, whereas the eudaimonic group downregulated it. If you follow me to part B, the hedonistic group had more inflammation, which again, in the long run is felt to be not ideal for our health, fewer antibodies, right, which is important for our immune system. And you could see the eudaimonic group is reversed, less inflammation and higher levels of antibodies. And I think what's interesting as you look at this is it kind of matches with Frankl's words, right? And this is me kind of transposing my own image with Frankl's words, that in a way, going through life asking the question, what do I expect from life, is more kind of analogous to the hedonistic perspective. And on the other hand, what does life expect from me? It's more in line with the question or the eudaimonic kind of outlook. Right? I hope you see that kind of analogy. Now, if we go back, remember Frankl argued 1 in 10 people survive seem to have that more meaning-driven, right? Mission driven, and maybe we could use the word eudaimonic outlook on life. And he argued like somehow they just survived camp life better. And I could tell you, one of the things that was the primary causes of death in the concentration camps were infectious illnesses. Whatever, typhus and various things that were rampant in these concentration camps was really what led to someone's demise oftentimes. And what you'll notice is that the eudaimonic group had higher levels of antibodies. So maybe there was something to Frankel's hypothesis, right? Maybe there was something about this idea that having that mission, not, not only did it give you a will, but maybe actually even changed your immune function, right? Lowered inflammation, improved immune function. This is just a guess on my part, but I think it's, I hope you think agree it's an interesting concept to at least grapple with. Now, if there are any cynics, I hope there are in the group or scientifically minded persons, some of you should be wondering, well, maybe, the eudaimonic people are just wired that way, and the hedonistic people are just wired that way. And you know what? What's the point of talking about this? Because we can't change our biology, right? The way we are is the way we are. And I think it's a great question. And a similar group in LA did another study, which I think really answers this. So let's look at this together. So they took 160 women and they randomized them to 4 groups. So the study went on for 5 weeks, and for these 5 weeks, these 160 women were randomized to condition one, which means they were asked several times a week for those 5 weeks to be kind to the world, to do an act of kindness for the world. The next group was told, okay, we want you to do acts of kindness for yourself, like self-care. The third group was asked to do acts of kindness for others. And the fourth group was a control group, like they weren't asked to change anything. And it was a kind of a simple study. All of these women had some baseline measures, including that CTRA gene, that gene, that expression that could, potentially go up or down depending on how you live your life. And then they go through that period, that intervention period, and they measure the same gene expression again after 5 weeks. So pretty straightforward study. If it doesn't make sense, please pause me. But here's what they did. I want to give you a little bit more detail. Um, the kindness to others group was, several times a week, they were kind of texted this information where it said, tomorrow, we want you to perform 3 nice things for others. And there were simple things, like one person, I just quoting one example, one person said, I made my significant other their favorite meal. Somebody else took out trash for an elderly person. Somebody else did something else. So it was just simple. It wasn't like huge, mind-blowing things, just simple acts of kindness. The next group was asked to do acts of kindness for the world. So one person donated money to Plant Discovery Day. The third group was told to do acts of kindness for yourself. So they were said, for example, tomorrow you're to perform 3 acts of kindness for yourself. So one person said, I just took the day and I went to the beach. Somebody else said, I left work early and I had some Thai coffee. I had a little self-care. So that kind of thing. The fourth group was the control. They told these folks to just go about your day and keep track of your activities. Okay, so this is the part where, again, if you want to unmute or write in the chat, which one of these groups or which ones of these groups do you think had the best improvements in reducing CTRA gene expression? So the fight or flight, that part of our gene expression that has to do with stress and adversity. Which groups do you think had the most improvements? I could tell you I had my own guess. I'll tell you what I thought it was before I saw the conclusions. But what do you all think? Okay, so one person wrote kindness to others and the world. Somebody else wrote kindness to others. Anyone else? Kindness to the world. Okay. So nobody, my guess was, I'll tell you what mine was. My guess was kindness to self because there's so much of an emphasis on self-care. including in healthcare. So that was what I guessed. But let me show you the results. There was only one group that showed a reduction in CTRA gene expression. It was those that were doing acts of kindness for others. The control group, acts of kindness for the world, and certainly self-care did not have any improvements. And I want to make a point. This was shown in just 5 weeks. So this idea that, you know what, I'm just born this way, it can't change my nervous system, my immune system, my genetic expression, and I'm just stuck with what I have, we know it's not true. In just 5 weeks, with simple acts of kindness for others, you were able to downregulate CTRA gene expression. And I think what this tells us is, again, maybe Frankel was right, right? We go back to, if we go back to his, going back a few slides, so don't get dizzy, right? All of these things, remember, he talked about acts of love for other. Doing something significant was often for others, right? Working with other people. And courage, you could argue, maybe is a different construct. But that the argument is that it's doing acts of kindness for others that seems to make, at least according to this study, the biggest difference in how our immune system is actually wired. And it's not to say that doing acts of kindness for the world is not important, and I'm not certainly not here to say, self-care is not important. And I'm also not here to say that we need to burn ourselves out by doing acts of kindness. And I know when we're going through a tough medical circumstance, it doesn't mean that we have to burn ourselves out by doing all these things for others when really we may be needing support. But I think what I've realized is if we're going to honor our sense of dignity as a human being, even when we're going through a tough time, if we imprint in ourselves this idea that, you know what, I'm going through cancer treatment and I'm incapable of doing anything for anyone else, if we have that mindset, I think we're compromising our sense of dignity. And again, the acts of kindness for others could be little things, right, that we can still do, like how maybe allowing somebody to do something for us can be an act of kindness in a way, or how we respond to our situation can be an act of kindness, or sharing some wisdom, or giving a thought, or thanking someone for something can be an act of kindness. But I think if we have in our mentality that, you know what, no, 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 I have this label, this cancer diagnosis, I'm incapable of being of service to anyone else, that I think is perpetuating a negative mind frame that probably is not serving us in a way that enhances resiliency. Okay. The next piece, and maybe this will be the last piece that I talk about, which is again, everything I'm talking about, I think is very difficult, but this is no exception. The art of mastering perspective. Now, one thing I often think of is no one experiences life, and they can argue against me. We don't experience life because life is far too vast to experience it. There's far too many things to pay attention to. We experience the life that we focus on. I'm going to say that again. We do not experience life. We experience the life that we focus on. And this is a hard skill to learn, but it's been said by people for a long time. The Buddha reportedly said, your worst enemy cannot harm you as much as your own thoughts unguarded. But once mastered, no one can help you as much, not even your father or your mother. So it's this idea of learning to master our thoughts and how we see the world that I want to spend a few minutes talking about. It does not mean putting on rose-colored glasses and thinking that everything in the world is perfect and everything is peachy and there's no problems at all in the world. That's not what anyone is saying, including me. But I think there's a way to have a healthy balance and learn to master perspective in a way that cultivates resiliency. And I'm going to go back to Frankl in his book, Man's Search for Meaning. And arguably, this is, if you haven't heard this, I hope you all have, this is probably one of the most important passages from his book where he was talking about, again, people living in these horrible conditions in the concentration camps. But he said this incredible passage. He said, "We who lived in concentration camps can remember the men who walked through the huts, comforting others, giving away their last piece of bread. They may have been few in number, but they offer sufficient proof that everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way." And I think sometimes we're told that we're just a product of our environment, of our biology, of our parents, our schooling, etc., and we have no control. And I hope what the that UCLA study that I was talking about, where right the thoughts that we think about and the actions that we take prove that we do have a vestige of control in our destiny. And certainly that's what Frankl was arguing, that no one can take away how we respond. And that may be the most important gift. However difficult this may be as important a gift as any. I'm going to skip a couple of these ideas for time. Um, and I want to go to one final point before we close. And this is the idea of connectivity. And I just gave away the answer, but sometimes when I'm kind of giving a talk to some of our medical students or residents, I'll ask them this question. I'll say, what human condition increases the risk of death as much as smoking and more than inactivity or obesity? And what will most students guess? They'll guess depression or stress or anxiety or one of those things. And I'm not saying that those things don't have any risks, but the answer that's become much more compelling based on the medical literature is actually loneliness, or I should really say chronic loneliness. And we now know that when we're lonely for months, years, and potentially decades at a time, again, our immune system, our nervous system is wired differently. It's associated with a 25% higher mortality rate and even higher breast cancer related mortality rates. And it's again, I don't think it's an oncology issue, right? More and more of us are living alone. I think the most compelling story that tells what may be happening pre pandemic was the following. So they basically asked Americans at two time points. First in 1985, how many people do you think you can call or confide in when you have an important issue? And in 1985, 1 in 10 Americans, so 10% of us said, nobody. There's like zero. I may have people around me, but there's no one I really feel comfortable discussing an important personal issue with. Now you repeat that 20 years later in 2004. At this point, almost 1 in 4 Americans said zero. Right? So from 85 to 2004, we went from 1 in 10 to 1 in 4. And I'm concerned, of course, that with the pandemic and social media and other factors that studies like this are showing that it may be even getting worse. This is Americans 15 and older, how much who they're spending time with. And again, pre-pandemic, you can see the numbers are going up, and it only got worse after 2020. How much more time we're spending as society alone compared with companions or friends. And the reason I'm bringing this topic up is number one, we're seeing, and I wish I had more time to talk about this, of how much chronic loneliness is impacting our health, both our psychological health and our physical health. And the reason I do bring it up is because right, we can do something about this. And the first point to make is that loneliness is subjective, right? You could have someone that lives alone and doesn't feel lonely if they feel connected to their neighbor, their aunt, their cousin, or a close friend across town, or whatever it may be. And we all know people, for example, who are married and maybe living with others, and they can feel very deeply lonely. So it's important to remember that loneliness is subjective, number one. And number two, I wouldn't bring this topic up if we didn't believe that loneliness could be overcome. And this is a long way of me getting to the point that if we know it's an important topic and we invest some time in addressing that, whether it's like trying to meet someone for coffee or lunch, and one of the reasons I love supporting the cancer support community is whether you're doing virtual programming or in person. I mean, I think in person is better if when feasible, but certainly virtual is something that we know that human connection is part of what it means to be whole human and part of what it means to cultivate health. Um, and I could spend hours talking about how it's been shown to reduce heart disease and dementia and depression. And I alluded to the issues about cancer survivorship and cancer recurrence rates and all-cause mortality and other factors all seem to be related to this. For some people, if that loneliness pattern has played out for too long, it may be helpful to have some therapy, specifically cognitive behavioral therapy, to help us reframe how we're seeing the people around us and how we can maybe re-examine the relationships in our life in a more positive way. But I could tell you, one of the researchers at the University of Chicago who did a lot of this research discovering how incredibly beneficial for our health social connectivity is, he, I think, nailed it with this quote. He said, the degree of social connection that can improve our health and happiness is both as simple and as difficult as being open and available to others. So it's like, I wish we could put on a pill, but again, there's no substitute for real human connectivity and human connection. Again, one of the reasons I like connecting with people directly and trying to talk about some of these ideas was illustrated by the United Kingdom. So Great Britain actually, again, before the pandemic in 2018, they created a ministry of loneliness because they were recognizing, again, in England and other UK countries, how prevalent loneliness was becoming and how much it's negatively impacting health. So, and I think the Surgeon General, the previous Surgeon General, actually made this an important topic for improving health was trying to combat loneliness. And I bring this up because I worry when I see studies like this that we're kind of moving in the wrong direction. This is from the Wall Street Journal, basically showing that from 1998 to 2019 and beyond, in 2023, patriotism has gone down, religion has gone down, having children has gone down, community involvement has gone down. It's only one thing that's gone up, which is interest in money. And I don't think that it's going to help us with loneliness and connectivity and fulfillment and all the things that I believe and I hope we could agree that are important in the big picture. I'm going to conclude with a couple of final thoughts because I know we're we're talking about, some really existential ideas that it's hard to change overnight. And I think this was a poetic quote, but I think it tells a biologic truth from Wilfred Peterson, and this is a beautiful one. This is what he said. As a single footstep will not make a path on the earth, so a single thought will not make a pathway in the mind. To make a deep physical path, we must walk and walk again. To make a deep mental path, we must think again and again the kind of thoughts we wish to have dominate our lives. So we can't think about these ideas just once or twice and say, you know what, I'm done. I did it. It's just not enough. It's not enough to get that neuro plastic wiring that we want to strengthen those thought muscles to make it a real habit. And in that vein, we have taken some of these ideas and others from Frankl and other inspiring figures to create one of our programs that we call the GRACE program, which stands for Growing Resilience and Courage, or GRACE. And it's 9 modules. So we spend about 10 hours over 9 weeks thinking about mindfulness and insight and what it means to have hope, and how do we really cultivate gratitude in an authentic way, and the importance of connectivity and meaning and purpose and courage and legacy and all these things. But we really give time, and we have certain exercises that we practice together and through homework to make it a habit, right? And as I alluded to, Viktor Frankl, these are my original copies. Viktor Frankl was one of the inspiring figures for this work. I think it's something you could all read on your own if you have an interest in this space. It's only about 120 pages, but it's incredibly profound, and quite quite moving, in those 120 pages. The other book I love that I recommend is my kid's scribble, but that's just, the copy I have. My Grandfather's Blessings by Rachel Remen. She also has these incredible pearls of wisdom that she shares through her work as a physician, working with people with chronic illness, and how we can change our perspective. We did subject the GRACE program and curriculum through a clinical trial. At the time, we were jamming it into 6 weeks as opposed to 9. We kind of spread it out now just to make it a little bit less intense. But we've published on this. We're happy to we're pleased to report that it's been shown to actually show that you could improve spiritual resiliency, hope, depression, anxiety in just a few weeks, right? With instilling these kind of habits. So if I had to summarize some of the pearls for enhancing resiliency, some of these things we talked about, some of them we didn't. It's really thinking about meaning-centered living rather than hedonistic living. Number two, mastering the art of perspective, which is, again, not easy, but there are strategies and teachers that can help us on how to do this. Having gratitude of exercise of some kind. I didn't talk about this someday, but fulfillment is also about having a sense of legacy, and it gives us a sense of perspective. Connection, we talked about very briefly. Some kind of mindfulness practice that makes sense or works for you. And through it all, trying to keep a sense of humor. And we do spend an hour thinking about how we can make this realistic in our world. I thank everyone so much for, logging in, for sharing your valuable time. I'll be happy to take questions or comments if you have any. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Dr. Asher, for such a meaningful presentation. If anyone does have any questions, feel free to unmute yourself and I can call on you, or feel free to type it into the chat and I can read it out loud. Yes, Brigitte.
Yes, hi there. Thank you so much for your presentation. When do you offer the GRACE program? Is that something that I could take if I was interested in taking that class?
We offer it generally twice a year. It used to be 3 times a year. We're just finishing a series right now.
Okay.
I hope you got the sense that it's a very intimate subject matter. We're talking about spiritual resiliency. So this current group that we did
Yeah.
exclusively in person. We're probably going to alternate from a virtual series to an in-person series. Even when we do it in person, we ask, like, because we limit it to about 10, 15 people. Cameras on, like, no, like we take it very seriously. Like, we want people very engaged. So if you want to email me, we do
Sure.
allow our patients, even if they're not Cedars-Sinai patients, to enroll when there's space. And usually there's a couple spots open for non-Cedars patients. So we'd be happy to extend it to others. If you want to send me a message, I could put you
Sure.
on the wait list.
Sure. That would be great. Thank you so much.
Of course.
Yes.
So
Great
it was a very
question.
light topic for Friday afternoon. So
Yeah.
thank you for,
We have the weekend to think about it, and also for the oncoming, the lifestyle changers, life changing our perspective
right.
for the long run, not just short term. All right. If there's no other questions, I just want to thank Dr. Asher again for joining us. and for everyone for taking the time to join. Yes, Ellie, go ahead.
Sorry for the last second. I guess I just would like to hear a little bit how this relates to someone in a position of extremely serious health situation, metastatic cancer. And, I was very interested in your talk. I found it, very inspiring. But when I turn this off, I'm fatigued. I'm, exhausted. And how can I integrate some of this into, and certainly not just me, but people in my situation where just trying to do the things we need to do every day is a challenge. And I would love to do some volunteering. I would, but what, I've racked my brain. What kind of volunteering can I possibly do? Or connectedness. I just moved from Southern California to Northern California. I don't know people. How can I get to know people when I'm in this situation? So obviously I don't expect you to have specific answers, but just how do you connect what you've said to someone in a situation like this?
First of all, thank you so much for your question, because I imagine many others have a similar question. I want to mention I have a number of thoughts if I could have a few moments to try my best. Number one, the study that we did was exclusively for women with metastatic cancer. So I still believe that there is this possibility to engage in this space, even when we're going through these very difficult medical circumstances. One point I didn't make clear, because we're focused on this existential piece, I do not want to underscore the importance I do want to underscore the importance of, the first thing that needs to be happen is if your physicians are trying to manage the physical symptoms as best as possible, because it's almost impossible to kind of engage in these, right? We think about the hierarchy of needs from Maslow. We first have to address, our sleeping. Are we in physical pain? How severe is the fatigue? What's our nutritional status? I hope somebody from your medical team is trying to optimize those arenas to the degree that is possible. And then I would say, and you brought up many important points. The list I had of things for, enhancing resiliency, it is impossible to do all of those things at once, or for some people, even over a period of time that might overload our system. And sometimes it's just engaging in one or two of those ideas that make the most sense. Doing everything I said would be way overtaxing for anyone, even under the best of circumstances. The other thing I would say is, again, one of the reasons I love cancer support community is that, and this is a question really for the group, I hope is that, it's serving a way to connect people. And again, even if it's virtual, I think that's very important. And the other point I would make is, when we are really depleted, and I talked about acts of kindness for others, I really meant what I said. Sometimes an act of kindness is our response to somebody bringing us a gift. Let's say somebody brought you a meal. How we respond to that person, I believe, is a gift to that other person. Some people, and I know I'm talking a lot, and I want to allow you an opportunity to ask back. There's this idea of thinking about what's the difference between helping someone versus being of service to someone. And to me, if I help someone, it's like I'm doing something for someone and I'm above them. You know, I'm the doctor and you're the patient, and I'm doing something for you, and I'm superior to you, and it's up, down. It's not a relationship between equals. But when someone is doing an act of service or kindness, it's a relationship between equals. So I am receiving as much as I give, and vice versa. No one feels diminished by this. And I know you may be saying that this is kind of cheesy, kind of queasy stuff, but I really believe that it makes a difference. And this is where, if we can cultivate that perspective that, you know, our response to a situation or a smile that we may offer another person, or just some little tidbit of information that we share with another person, without, you know, going to do these physically exhausting monumental tasks, in my mind, that all counts towards acts of kindness and acts of service. But to start with the root of your question, um, it's a challenge. I've been in this space for too long to think that just a medicine alone will be the answer for these more profound existential topics. Um, I hope I at least touched upon a little bit of that question.
You did, thank you.
Hi,
Thank you.
I'm participating, and I've just learned of the organization last night, so I feel really fortunate to be able to be on this call. But I just wanted to share something, Ellie, that I came across just last night. I submitted a form for a mentor that is remote, that is accessible remotely for my mom, and I submitted it probably at midnight, and already I have an email in my inbox letting me know that there's been a match that was made. And so it sounds like you're in Northern California, and perhaps that could be a way to have a connection, because I'm realizing that it's not enough for my mom to connect with me, that she needs to connect with others who maybe have experienced or are experiencing similar situations.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
And by the way, I think I really appreciate that comment, because it kind of reinforces what I was trying to convey with the Nietzsche quote, which is, you know, if you figure out the why, you'll figure out, you know, if you focus on the why, you'll figure out the how. I didn't share at all, for the most part, on the how, like how we're gonna, if it makes sense for you, bring in humor or connectivity or meaning or purpose, but we really focused on the why. And I hope all the resources that you have here and with the group and the cancer support community and through your friends and family and religious organizations and all the rest, I hope that will help the how. And I recognize the shortcoming that I really focused on just a few bits of the why.
Thank you so much, Dr. Asher. If there are no other questions, all right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Thank you, Dr. Asher.
Thank you, everyone. My
you.
pleasure to be here.
Thank you.